Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. I am happy to be playing along once again with the Mix It Up Monday challenge, which is hosted over at the Peace Craft Love Facebook group. And that is where we take a sketch, and here is our sketch for this time around. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head who this sketch was by, but I'll pop it up on the screen when I can figure it out. And we take that sketch and we mix it up with some mixed media, so let's dive in. All right, I pulled out these two photos, and you'll see later that I'm going to make one of these smaller because, as the sketch indicated, it had 3 smaller photos, and I do find that my scale of these photos are a little too big. I pulled out my counterfeit kit, which I use for other projects typically, but I thought it could work very well for this project. And I am going to work on this base of this kind of plaid, argyle-y plaid looking. And I'm going to follow the sketch pretty closely. Did I say that already? Instead of using that square in the background behind the photos as another layer of pattern paper, that's where I'm going to put my mixed media. And I'm going to move the title to take up the space of one of the larger embellishments, and the little spatterings that they have, I'm going to fill in with some stars. So let's get prepped for the mixed media. I'm going to tape off my pattern paper. And you could do this step with gesso or white paint, or even if you don't want to get messy, you could do this layer with some vellum. But I'm going to use, this is the first time I've done this, I'm going to use white pigment ink. And I'm using my brayer, and I kind of showed you that when you're inking up a brayer, you need to ink all the way to the end of the ink pad, lift it up, and then start back up at the beginning, because if you just wiggle it back and forth, you'll get just one patch of dark ink on your brayer without the thing being fully inky. So when I put the ink to my paper, I'm going to start on the left or on the right and move to the left, and then I will repeat that from the left to the right, and I will dry this in between and do 3 layers of ink. And then the next step of my mixed media is this glitter paste. Now this paste is from Gina K, and it had started to dry out on me. I added some water to it, used a little elbow grease to kind of mix up the lumps and chunks, and then I tightly put press and seal back down over it so that there was as little air in the jar as possible. And that seems to have kept it fresh. So if you have any new jars of texture paste, be sure to keep the air out of them so they don't go bad on you. Okay, the interesting thing that I'm doing here is I'm using these little latticey die cut pieces that I worked on another project with as a stencil. So I've kind of pieced them together puzzle style so that I could get them to cover the whole area of my background. And I put my stencil paste through there, and I'm sure to clean up my tools right away afterwards, as well as peel off those stencils, quote unquote stencils, and to peel off the masking tape right away, because that texture paste does dry pretty hard, and if you let those things get too dry on there, they'll get stuck or they'll peel off chunks of your paste. But if you got all that going on, here's what your paste should look like when it's dry. Now I find that this paste does kind of flake off just a tiny bit wherever there was like weird edges that lifted up around the stencil. So I just kind of wipe those down and move them off. All right, and here I am planning out the structure of the layout, and that's where I decided I needed to print this photo much smaller. And I am going to follow the sketch with the vertical and the horizontal crisscross patterns that cut through that back square. I'm going to go ahead and mat my bigger photo on some white paper just to help it stand out a little bit more from the patterns that I will put behind it, which is going to be this pieced together kind of quilted pattern paper, which I created earlier in the month, and I can link you up to that creation video if you're interested. At first I thought I was going to mat that piece with both white and this green, but as I was moving the green around, I thought, no, that should be my horizontal strip. And in fact, I cut it down into multiple strips instead of using just one wide strip. All right, I am cutting that fishtail into this piece, and it's rather convenient that my triangles make a very nice larger triangle to cut that fishtail out of, so I just used the pattern to be my guide. I did mat the edges of that banner with the white just to help it separate from the background a little bit more. And here's where I decide that my strips are a little too wide, and I will slice them down in the end, and I think they end up being 1/4 inch wide in the end. And I am playing with some different options here, but I do decide to keep the thinner strips. All right, now you notice that my vertical piece does not reach all the way to the top of the paper, and I'm going to solve that by cutting it where it will be hidden behind a photo, and then shifting it up so that I have what looks like a full piece back there. I did decide to move my focal photo down to the crisscross of those horizontal and vertical elements, because that is leading lines that help draw your eye to the focal photo. Oh, here's a tip on if you're adhering things over texture paste or gels or anything like that, use liquid glue and some pressure. I had a little stamp block resting on those pieces while the glue dries so that they will adhere nicely to the lumps and bumps in the background. All right, and here is where I'm thinking about how I want to cut that pattern so that I can stretch it and get the most out of it. And it's pretty easy at this point since I moved my photos around, but when I had the photos in a different orientation, it was turning out to be a little more complicated. So moving that photo gave me two good things out of here. I get that focal photo on that intersecting lines, and it's easier to cut that background piece. What I didn't quite cover there was that when I here I am popping. I'm going to pop up that photo on foam strips. What I didn't quite cover was that those photos, I was sure to set them so that I could see all 4 corners of my background square so that the eye can read it as a square. All right, while I was mentioning that, here is where I'm working on my title, and I did move that title down to take the place of that left-hand kind of floral cluster there. And so I will build up some pieces here, especially since these alpha letters that I'm using are super, super thin. I don't want to put those directly on the texture paste because they will bend and warp over the texture paste. So I did pop those up on some sturdier cardstock sticker tags. And since I brought in yellow and pink to that area, I am going to be sure to bring those colors into my other embellishment zones. Now, the sketch has 2 bigger embellishment zones and then some sprinkles, and it does not have a place for journaling set aside specifically, so I'm going to add my own journaling zone. And here I am building up my journaling cluster. Now, here's where I decided that I needed to make sure those colors from the title do flow through the other clusters. So I pulled out a floral cluster, which totally works with the sketch, and that cluster has pinks and yellows in it. So I pulled up that cluster that I had started, and I am reorganizing that cluster so that I can fit that floral background in there. And once that is done, I can move on to putting these star embellishments on. Now, I did make those star embellishments. I believe that's in the same video that I made that quilted background. But here's a tip for adhering vellum. Put a puddle on a scratch piece of paper, dip your vellum into the glue, and then kind of tap it off a couple of times so that the glue is evenly spread across the entire surface of the vellum. And then you won't notice the glue. If you just put a spot, it'll leave a darker spot, and you will see that. So as I finished explaining that, I did finish my layout, and I am leaving you with a few close-up pictures of everything I worked on here. And I want to say thank you so much for watching. Don't forget that this is a hop, and all of the hoppers are listed in the comments below, and I hope you'll check out their channels and their take on this sketch as well. Thanks once again for being here, and until next time, I hope you have an artful day.